I'm sure you're paying more for whatever you're buying at the moment, looking at the figures we can see from the NBS and even the realities when you visit the markets. But let's get talking now. In October 2022, President Tinubu released an 80-page policy document. That was before he became president. That's Renewed Hope 2023, an action plan for a better Nigeria. He emphasized that his objective was to foster a renewed society based on shared prosperity, tolerance, compassion, and unwavering commitment to treating each citizen with equal respect and due regards. On the fiscal policy side, he promised to review federal government's budget methodology, embark on a national infrastructure campaign, and drive an import substitution agenda, among others. On the monetary policy side, the nation will be witnessing a tight management of exchange rates. That will be different from a loose open market approach. Inflation should be more targeted and well managed, while foreign debt obligations will be limited and renegotiated. Well, let's talk more about those policies. Joining me to do this, he is a partner, an Africa tax leader with PricewaterhouseCoopers, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele. He's an author, keynote speaker, strategist, policy analyst, and I can go on and on. Thank you so much. It's good to have you on the program, Mr. Oyedele.
Thank you, Tolu, for having me.
Yes, before we go round the issues the general issues, talking about subsidy removal and others, let's go straight to the World Bank and the IMF. Even the Bank of America yesterday, who visited the president, just saying that all of these moves remain a step in the right direction. So should I say that, would you do us an assessment of what you've seen so far? And what below expectation? Has it performed above expectation? Yes, it's a short time, but those bold steps, what does it really mean? What impact will it have on our entire business environment?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tolu. You're right. I think even from the local environment, you will see a lot of analysts and business leaders, organized private sector, commending the actions of the president in terms of I'll say maybe the most difficult decisions that we all agree were necessary, but were not taken for a very long time, especially the first subsidy removal, which has become a huge drain on the country's resources, and depriving us the opportunity to provide the needed social services, infrastructure, human capital development for our people. And then there's the exchange rate harmonization, which has become a problem over the past couple of years. And, addressing these two very important issues, I think anybody that means well for the country will not disagree with those decisions. There are people who differ as to the approach that was adopted, but not the action in and of itself. I would say it's too early in the day to try and assess, the performance of the government overall, because while I agree with the actions that have been taken, we're yet to see the outcome that we're looking for. And at the end of the day, we'll measure the performance not only on the basis of the actions taken, but also in terms of the outcome that we're able to achieve. Because the difference between when you make policy decisions and when you see the outcome that you want is the implementation part of it. So that implementation also requires a lot of other interventions. Sometimes is policy communication, sometimes is complementary measures. You have something you've done on the monetary side, you need to do something to complement it on the fiscal side, is the trade side, and so on and so forth. So just a little over 1 month, I'll say so far the government is doing well, but there's still a lot more to do going forward.
Interesting way to start this discussion. There's a lot to be done going forward. According to reports, 3.9 trillion naira will be saved in 2023 alone from subsidy removal. Looks good. But to you, if this happens, which is expected to happen according to the figures that we have, what should be the quick wins or quick fixes for government that Nigerians will feel the impact of this subsidy removal? Because I know everyone, and I'm sure you're one of them, have talked about we not being able to sustain subsidy payment.
Yes. So the subsidy removal, there are different numbers being estimated in terms of the savings. I think 3.9 trillion is on the low side, because if the budget for just 6 months alone was close to 3 trillion or thereabouts, maybe that 3.9 just for the remaining 6 months of the year, then that way I'll say
yes, now to the end of the year.
Yeah. So in 6 months, if you save 3.9 trillion, also I have to add that there's also a lot of savings coming from, FX subsidy removal. So I got this subsidy removal because when it was 460 something, only a few people who were privileged were getting access to it when the real value was around 750. So that alone also gives a lot of revenue to government, which if you estimate, depending on the revenue that government earns, you are easily talking about almost 300 naira per dollar. If you do only $10 billion for, maybe for the 6 months, you're easily talking about another, 3 trillion naira. So it's a lot of savings for government. Now, what should government start doing with it? I think on one hand, for the federal government, because according to the immediate past administration, they had already factored in this removal of subsidy into the second half of the year. So it's not like there's money anywhere they're going to have in their bank accounts. It's just that the borrowing they'll have to make will remain as planned. It won't go up. So federal government has to be a little bit more intentional as to where to find the money to provide the interventions and the quick result that Nigerians are looking for and truly deserve, to be honest. But I think the biggest impact will be felt at the subnational level. So as the money that goes into federation accounts from these, so from June, there should be that accretion into federation account that is significant. And that sharing should happen this month, July. As the states are getting that increased allocation, as well as local government, there has to be a commitment by all states and every local government in Nigeria to apply those extra amount that they are getting that they wouldn't have gotten at all towards helping the people. And the area to apply those savings, in my view, is to just go to the multidimensional poverty report. Things like access to clean water, access to basic education, basic healthcare, just being able to have, road from the farm to the market. So those basic things. So this is not the money to go and think about going to the moon or going to space. This is the money to take care of people's basic needs so that life can become more meaningful. And my view is that government should even stop telling us what they want to do with the savings. They should just start doing it because the money is real and they will start getting it from this July. So that will be the way to try and cushion the impact because it's really difficult out there. Some people wake up in the morning, they don't know where the next meal will come from. They don't have the money to go to work. And some don't even have jobs. So it's tough. And prices are going up, every day, particularly food, which is where most households in Nigeria spend their income. So if you're already from 3 meals a day, you've cut down to 2. From 2, you cut down to 1. From 1, you remove some, items from the food. Before you used to have maybe 1 beef and pomo, you reduce it to 1 pomo. What else can you cut for that? It's tough. So which is why these interventions have to come very quickly. They have to be meaningful and they have to be impactful.
Cost of governance is something that everyone has also been talking about, that if the citizens will have to bear all of this, government also has to take part in bearing with all of this. But I'd like you to comment on that. And let me add to the fact that we need to ramp up production, that's crude oil production, for us to be able to make more money as a country. And it seems that government is also focusing on this. I don't know how you react to that. I'm thinking about other ways that we could generate more effects. How does this come to you, sir?
Yes, in your intro, you mentioned monetary policy. So, essentially, the monetary policy objective is to have price stability. And you do that sometimes by controlling money supply, including using interest rates as well as reserve requirements. So, interest rates in Nigeria is high, in my view, and the president even alluded to it in his inaugural speech, that the interest rate is so high, it's going to be difficult for you to have any meaningful development in the real sector, because how many businesses can easily pay back interest rates over 25%? Because if MPR is 18.5, you can imagine you don't get that at the banks, it will be more than that. So to be able to cover that interest cost alone and still have some margins left for a sustainable business is difficult. So we have to be able to address that. But the other area where we don't even talk about enough is the cash reserve requirement. So you take money to the bank, and a significant percentage of it is taken by the central bank at zero amount of interest to the bank. So the banks have to cover that cost out of whatever is left for them that they can trade with. And that's one of the reasons why there's so much gap between the amount you get if you stay with the bank in terms of interest income versus the amount you have to pay when you borrow from the bank. I think that's an issue that we need to address as a country. But beyond that, you would also notice that inflation itself seems to be difficult to control. Despite raising the interest rates, the inflation rate is not coming down. A big factor that plays into that goes to the heart of the question you asked. That part is the exchange rate. Because we do a lot of importation, there's always a flow through of the impact of exchange rate into inflation in Nigeria. If we are able to ramp up production of crude oil to the level of OPEC quota assigned to Nigeria, and then produce even more and allocate to the Dangote refinery for local refining, what will happen is, one, we conserve the FX that we have been spending, which is significant. I think last year was about $16 billion just to import petrol. You conserve that FX. And then from the Dangote refinery, maybe also government refineries, hopefully, you begin to export and you earn foreign exchange. What that will do for you is it provide liquidity in the market. And that's why the likes of Bank of America believe that Naira is now undervalued, because they expect it to be around 650 or thereabouts. When you get that result, what will happen is there will be an impact on inflation that it will begin to moderate. In addition to that, you of course make more revenue, because it's both revenue and foreign exchange receipt that you get from production. So the government needs to prioritize whatever needs to be done to make that happen as a matter of urgency to address our immediate issues, because we have unified exchange rates, but we don't have the liquidity. That's why the rate is so volatile. Sometimes you see, so I actually made a payment today. I was paying for a visa to go to one of these African countries. So I paid online. When I paid online and I saw the exchange rate that they used, it was 900 naira. So the bank probably even added a little bit more because of the volatility in the exchange rate. That needs to come down to a moderate level. Otherwise, the actions may not give us the results we desperately need.
Real stuff there. Well, let's wrap up on this note. Why I'm worried about inflation, and I spoke around this yesterday, and my analyst was telling me that the central bank has continued to use rate hikes to address inflation, which seems not to be working. But my question really to you is, if government decides to increase minimum wage, maybe 100%, maybe 150%, and maybe other companies to other employers to decide to do same, what sort of figures will we be seeing as we move to the next quarter? Inflation and around growth.
Yeah, so it's an interesting conversation, Tolu. So on one hand, the subsidy remover on petrol, as well as the FX subsidy remover, should help the government to stop printing naira to spend. So we expect that there should be reduction in money supply. That in itself will help to moderate inflation on one hand. If you increase salaries, of civil servants, and then some private sector would also respond to the extent that they can afford it, you're likely to have an upward pressure on inflation, particularly on basic items, because when poor people earn a little bit more, they're not going to buy a car, right? They're going to buy more food, they're going to buy basic needs. And those basic needs, as a matter of priority, government has to find a way to stimulate production. How do you help farmers to produce? The price of food globally is actually coming down at this time, but we haven't seen a lot of that impact in Nigeria. So help farmers to go back to the farm and be able to do farming in a safe environment without the fear of being kidnapped or killed. And also review our border closure policy. So we still have, I think there was realization of importation of vehicles through the land borders, but we need to do the same thing for food in particular, rice. If we are not producing enough for our consumption locally, why are we deceiving ourselves? Calculate the difference that you're not producing locally and allow it to come in legitimately. That will bring down the price while you're still protecting the local producers of those items. That's just one example. So you have to use complementary policies, monetary policy, fiscal policies, and trade policies to address our immediate needs. Otherwise, Nigerians will run out of patience, and then you don't want to get to a point where there are protests here and there before government responds. I do think that the government is taking the right steps, and they're responding to the issues and concerns of the business sector. I know there are people concerned about tax matters here and there, and I know that's also an area where the government plans to address. So I'll say fingers crossed over the next coming days and weeks, we should begin to see concrete actions to address these pressing needs.
I must thank you so much for your time, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele. Great talking to you as usual on the program regards to this topic. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Tulu.
Yeah, Africa Tax Leader there, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, speaking to us, is with PricewaterhouseCoopers around the economic policy of President Bola Tinubu and expectations, of course, moving ahead.